A broke teacher bought lunch for a hungry student with her last $5, never knowing that the child's absent father was watching every moment from his black limousine parked across the street. What happened next would change 3 lives forever and prove that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. The fluorescent lights in Room 14B buzzed with their familiar hum as Sarah Martinez packed the last of her students' art projects into a worn cardboard box. The October afternoon sun slanted through the cracked windows of Lincoln Elementary, casting long shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor. Another day, another small miracle that she'd managed to make it through without breaking. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah glanced at the clock, 4:47 p.m. The school had been empty for over an hour, but she lingered, as she always did, grading papers and preparing lessons because her tiny studio apartment felt more like a reminder of everything she couldn't afford than a home. The radiator that barely worked, the kitchen table that doubled as her desk, the stack of overdue bills she shuffled but never quite managed to pay. She pulled her wool cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The sweater had seen better days. There was a small hole near the left elbow that she'd tried to mend with navy thread that didn't quite match, and the cuffs were frayed from 3 years of constant wear. But it was warm, and warmth was a luxury she couldn't take for granted, especially when the school's heating system worked sporadically at best. In her canvas tote bag, a gift from her mother before she'd passed 2 years ago, Sarah carefully placed her lunch container. Empty, as usual. She'd eaten half her peanut butter sandwich at noon and saved the rest for dinner. Again, the routine had become so familiar, she barely thought about it anymore. Stretch every dollar, every meal, every piece of clothing, until there was nothing left to stretch. Her checking account balance glowed mockingly in her memory. $23.47. Enough to cover the remainder of her phone bill. Or groceries for 3 days, but not both. She'd choose groceries, as she always did. The phone could wait another week. Everything could always wait another week. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the lesson plans she'd spent her Sunday creating. 28 copies for her 2nd grade class, printed at FedEx because the school's copy machine had been broken for 6 months and wouldn't be fixed until the district found room in the budget. $4.67 from her own pocket, like the pencils she bought in bulk from the dollar store, the tissues she restocked when the kids had colds, the snacks she kept in her desk drawer for the children who came to school hungry. And there were so many who came hungry. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway made her look up. Strange. The building should have been locked by now, the custodian having finished his rounds. Sarah walked to her classroom door and peered out into the dimly lit corridor. There, sitting on the floor outside the main office, was a small figure hunched against the wall. 8-year-old Emma Chun, still in her school clothes, backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. Her straight black hair fell across her face, but Sarah could see the telltale signs of tears, the way her small shoulders shook, the quiet sniffling that echoed in the empty hallway. Sarah's heart clenched. Emma was one of her quietest students, the kind of child who completed every assignment perfectly but never raised her hand, who sat alone at lunch and walked home by herself every day. In 3 months of school, Sarah had never seen anyone pick Emma up. No parent at conferences, no emergency contact, except for a grandmother who spoke only Mandarin. "Emma?" Sarah called softly, stepping into the hallway. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here so late?" The little girl looked up, her dark eyes wide and frightened. "Miss Martinez," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was waiting for my dad, but I think he forgot again." Sarah's chest tightened. She knelt down beside Emma, noticing how thin the child's jacket was for the chilly October weather, how her small hands were red from cold, despite being inside. "How long have you been waiting, honey?" "Since school ended," Emma said, looking down at her hands. "But it's okay. Sometimes he's just really busy with work. He'll come. 2 hours." This 8-year-old had been sitting alone in a school hallway for 2 hours waiting for a father who hadn't shown up. Sarah felt anger rise in her throat, not at Emma, never at Emma, but at whoever had failed this child so completely. "Have you eaten anything since lunch?" Sarah asked gently. Emma shook her head, and Sarah's decision was made before she could think twice about it. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out the small container that held her dinner, the remaining half of her peanut butter sandwich, and a bruised apple she'd been saving. Outside, beyond the school's front windows, a sleek black limousine sat idling across the street, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the figure watching from within. But Sarah didn't notice. Her entire focus was on the small, cold child in front of her, who needed exactly what Sarah had to give, even if it was everything she had left. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that none of them could have predicted. Without hesitation, Sarah opened the plastic container and placed it gently in Emma's small hands. "Here, sweetheart. You need this more than I do." Emma stared at the sandwich as if it were made of gold. "But Miss Martinez, this is your food." "I can't." "Yes, you can," Sarah said firmly. Her voice warmed despite the exhaustion that ran bone deep. "And you will. Teachers eat way too much anyway." She winked, trying to lighten the moment, though her stomach quietly protested the lie. Emma took a tentative bite, and Sarah watched as the little girl's eyes fluttered closed in relief. When had this child last eaten a proper meal? The question haunted Sarah as she noticed how carefully Emma chewed, making each bite last as if the sandwich might disappear if she ate too quickly. "Miss Martinez?" Emma's voice was muffled around. "A small bite. Why are you always so nice to me?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Because every child deserves kindness. Because you remind me why I became a teacher. Because no one should sit alone in empty hallways waiting for love. That never comes." Instead, she simply smiled and tucked a strand of Emma's hair behind her ear. "Because you're worth being nice to, Emma Chun. Never forget that." Across the street, behind the tinted windows of the black Mercedes limousine, James Chun felt something crack inside his chest. He had been sitting there for 47 minutes, watching his daughter through the school's front windows, watching her wait for him, just as she had waited countless times before. His hands gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles went white, his breath fogging the glass as he wrestled with the same internal battle that had paralyzed him for 8 months. James Chun was worth $847 million on paper. His tech company, Nexus Innovations, had just secured a contract that would revolutionize cloud computing for major corporations. 3 floors of his downtown high-rise were dedicated to his personal offices. He had homes in San Francisco, New York, and Singapore. He could buy anything, solve any problem, command any room, but he couldn't walk 50 feet across a street to face his 8-year-old daughter. Not since the accident. Not since the moment his wife, Lynn, had looked at him in that hospital bed and whispered, "You were supposed to pick her up from school that day, James. You promised." Not since Lynn had died 3 days later, her last words echoing in his mind like a curse. "Don't let work become more important than Emma. Don't let her grow up the way you did." For 8 months, James had funded Emma's life from a distance. He paid for the best after-school programs, arranged for cars to pick her up, hired the most qualified nannies. But each caregiver eventually quit, some citing Emma's withdrawal, others mentioning the child's habit of sitting by windows for hours, waiting for a father who sent assistants instead of himself. 2 weeks ago, the latest nanny had quit without notice, and James had been paralyzed by the logistics of finding another. So Emma had been walking home alone, staying late at school, existing in the spaces between his business calls and board meetings. He told himself she was fine. Children were resilient. She had everything she needed, but watching her now, seeing her thin shoulders shake as she ate that teacher's sandwich with desperate gratitude, James realized his daughter had nothing she actually needed. Not safety, not consistency, and certainly not love. Through the window, he watched the teacher, Miss Martinez, according to Emma's few mentions of school, sit down beside his daughter on the hallway floor. This woman, who clearly had very little, had given Emma her own dinner without a moment's hesitation. She wasn't being paid extra for this kindness. She hadn't been asked to stay late. She certainly hadn't been compensated for the sandwich that was probably her only meal for the evening. And yet she stayed. She cared. She saw Emma as worth saving. James felt his eyes burn with shame. His daughter was eating a stranger's food because he had been too much of a coward to provide what she really needed, a father who showed up. Inside the school, Sarah was helping Emma clean up the sandwich crumbs when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter. I've been watching from outside. Could you stay with her for just 5 more minutes? I'm coming in." James Chun. Sarah's heart stopped. Emma's father had been there the whole time, watching his daughter sit alone, hungry and forgotten, while he remained in his car. A mixture of confusion and anger rose in her throat. What kind of parent watches their child suffer from across the street? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But then she looked at Emma, who had perked up at the mention of her father, hope flickering in her dark eyes for the first time all afternoon. Whatever was happening here, whatever complicated story lay behind a father who watched from limousines instead of walking through school doors, Emma needed her parent. And if Sarah could help make that happen, she would. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "I think your dad might be here soon." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? He came? He remembered? Sarah's chest tightened at the pure joy in the child's voice. Really? He's on his way in right now. Through the school's front windows, they both watched as the limousine door opened and a tall figure in an expensive suit stepped onto the sidewalk. For a moment, James Chun stood frozen, staring at the building that housed his daughter. Then, with visible effort, he straightened his shoulders and began walking toward the entrance. But neither Sarah nor Emma had any idea that this moment, this choice by a broke teacher to share her last meal, was about to unravel years of grief, guilt, and missed opportunities in ways that would change all of their lives forever. What happened when James Chun finally walked through those school doors would prove that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the power to heal the deepest wounds. The school's front door opened with a heavy metallic click that echoed through the empty hallways like a gunshot. Sarah felt Emma tense beside her, the little girl's body coiled with anticipation and something that looked almost like fear. James Chun stepped into the fluorescent-lit corridor, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the kind of parent she was used to seeing at Lincoln Elementary. His charcoal suit probably cost more than her monthly salary, and his Italian leather shoes clicked against the worn linoleum with quiet authority. Everything about him screamed money, power, success, everything that felt foreign in their underfunded school, where teachers bought supplies with their own grocery money. But it was his eyes that stopped Sarah cold. Hollow, haunted, carrying the weight of someone who had lost everything that mattered despite having everything money could buy. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. James froze 3 steps into the hallway, his confident stride faltering. For a moment, he just stared at his daughter, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time in months. Sarah watched his face crumble as he took in Emma's thin frame, her worn jacket, the way she instinctively moved closer to her teacher as if seeking protection. "Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking on her name. "Baby, I'm so sorry I'm late." "You're always late," Emma said matter-of-factly, but without anger, just acceptance. The casual way she said it, as if a father's absence was as predictable. As sunrise made Sarah's heart shatter. James Chun, technology mogul and business genius, stood there like a man who had forgotten how to speak to his own child. Sarah watched him struggle, saw him open his mouth and close it again, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. This was the moment Sarah should have stepped back, should have given them privacy, should have let father and daughter figure out their relationship without a broke schoolteacher as witness. Instead, she found herself moving protectively closer to Emma. "Mr. Chun," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "I'm Sarah Martinez, Emma's teacher. We need to talk." James's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw him really register her presence for the first time. He took in her worn cardigan, her tired face, the empty food container still sitting beside Emma on the floor. Understanding dawned across his features, followed quickly by shame. "You're the one who," he began, "who fed your daughter." "Yes," Sarah stood up, placing herself slightly between James and Emma. "Emma has been waiting here for 2 hours. She was hungry, cold, and alone. Again." The word "again" hung in the air like an accusation. James winced as if she'd slapped him. "I was outside," he said weakly. "I saw you were outside?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You were sitting in your limousine watching your 8-year-old daughter sit on a hallway floor, hungry and scared, and you didn't come in?" Emma looked between them, her small face confused. "Daddy, you saw me waiting. Why didn't you come get me?" It was the simplest question in the world, asked with a child's perfect innocence, and it destroyed James Chun completely. Sarah watched. This powerful man who probably commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions, without blinking, crumble under his daughter's clear, trusting gaze. James's voice broke. "I didn't know how to face you, Emma. I kept thinking about Mommy, about how I promised her I'd take better care of you, and I kept failing." The confession spilled out of him like water through a broken dam. "Every time I look at you, I see her. And I remember that the day she died, she asked me why I wasn't there to pick you up from school that day. Why work was more important than my family." Again, Sarah felt her anger deflate, replaced by something more complex. This wasn't just negligence. This was a man drowning in grief and guilt, pushing away the one person who could help him heal because he was too afraid of failing her the way he'd failed his wife. Emma, with the startling wisdom that children sometimes possess, walked slowly toward her father. "Daddy," she said, reaching up to take his hand, "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here." James dropped to his knees and pulled Emma into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Sarah watched them cling to each other, this broken billionaire and his lonely daughter, and realized she was witnessing something precious, the first step toward healing. But as James looked up at her over Emma's head, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name. Sarah had no idea that this moment was only the beginning. What James Chun was about to offer would challenge everything she thought she knew about her own life, and force her to choose between the comfortable struggle she knew and a future she'd never dared to imagine. 3 days later, Sarah found an envelope slipped under her classroom door before the morning bell. Her name was written across the front in expensive stationery, the kind with weight and texture that spoke of money she'd never possessed. Inside was a handwritten note in careful script. *, Miss Martinez, Emma hasn't stopped talking about you. She says you make her feel safe in a way I haven't been able to for months. I have a proposition that might benefit us both. Would you consider tutoring Emma after school? I can offer $200 per session, 3 times a week. She needs consistency, and frankly, so do I. James Chun *. Sarah stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. $600 a week. More than she made in a month of teaching. It would solve her rent problem, her grocery problem, her car payment that was 2 weeks overdue. But something about accepting money from Emma's father felt wrong, like she was being paid for kindness that should have been freely given. That afternoon, as her students filed out, Emma lingered by Sarah's desk, her small hands fidgeting with her backpack. "Straps, Miss Martinez?" Emma's voice was hesitant. "Daddy asked if you might want to help me with homework sometimes. At our house. He says you're really good at teaching." Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level. "What do you think about that idea, Emma?" "I think." Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think Daddy's trying to learn how to be a good dad again. And maybe you could help with that too." The simple honesty in Emma's voice nearly broke Sarah's heart. This 8-year-old was already trying to fix her broken family. And somehow she decided Sarah was part of the solution. An hour later, Sarah found herself standing in front of the Chun family's Pacific Heights mansion, feeling completely out of place. The house was all glass and steel, perched on a hill with views of the bay that probably cost more than Sarah would earn in her entire lifetime. She almost turned around 3 times before finally pressing the doorbell. James answered the door himself, having traded his business suit for jeans and a cable-knit sweater that somehow made him look younger and more approachable. "You came," he said, and Sarah heard genuine relief in his voice. "I almost didn't," Sarah admitted. "This feels like charity, Mr. Chun. I don't take charity." "It's not charity," James said quickly. "Emma needs you. I need you. You're not doing us a favor. We're the ones who need help." Emma appeared at her father's side, beaming. "Miss Martinez, come see my room. Daddy put up my art from school on the refrigerator." As Emma dragged her through the house, Sarah marveled at the contradiction. The mansion was stunning but felt empty, like a magazine showroom rather than a home. But in the kitchen, she could see Emma's artwork taped to the stainless steel refrigerator. Colorful crayon drawings that brought life to the sterile space. "I kept everything," James said quietly, noticing her gaze. "Every paper she brought home. I didn't know how to tell her that." They settled in the kitchen for their first tutoring session, Emma spreading her math homework across the marble island, while James made coffee with hands that shook slightly nervous. Sarah realized about whether he was doing this right. As they worked through multiplication problems, Sarah watched the dynamics unfold. Emma was patient with her father's attempts to help, gently correcting him when he tried to rush through problems instead of letting her work them out. James, in turn, was learning to sit still, to listen, to let his daughter struggle through challenges instead of immediately offering solutions or distractions. "Daddy used to do my homework for me," Emma confided to Sarah during a break. "He said it was faster that way." "But that's not really learning, is it?" "No, sweetheart, it's not," Sarah agreed, glancing at James, who had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm learning too," James said quietly. "Emma's teaching me that taking time doesn't mean being inefficient. It means being present." Over the following weeks, their routine developed naturally. Sarah would arrive at 4, and she and Emma would work through homework while James gradually joined them, first hovering uncertainly, then pulling up a chair, finally contributing to discussions about Emma's day and her struggles with fractions. Sarah found herself staying for dinner more often than not. Simple meals that James was learning to cook because Emma had mentioned she missed family dinners. She watched him fumble through making grilled cheese sandwiches with the same intensity he probably brought to million-dollar business deals. And something inside her chest warmed despite her efforts to maintain professional distance. "You don't have to try so hard," Sarah told him one evening as he stressed over whether the pasta was cooked perfectly. "Yes, I do," James replied, not looking up from the stove. "I have 8 months of trying to make up for." Emma, coloring at the kitchen table, looked up at both of them. "Daddy, Miss Martinez isn't going anywhere." You don't have to be perfect right now. It was such a simple statement from an 8-year-old, but it hit both adults like a revelation. James's shoulders relaxed for the first time since Sarah had met him, and she realized that somewhere along the way, she had started to care about this broken family's healing as much as Emma's academic progress. But what none of them realized was that their growing bond was being watched, evaluated, and judged by others who had very different ideas about what was best for Emma Chun. The comfortable rhythm they'd found was about to be tested in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about family, money, and where they belonged in each other's lives. The trouble started with a photograph. Someone had taken a picture of Sarah and Emma leaving the Chen mansion together, Emma's small hand tucked safely in Sarah's, both of them laughing at something Emma had said. The image appeared on a local gossip blog with the headline, "Tech Billionaire's New Nanny? Teacher Cashes In on Student's Tragedy." Sarah stared at her laptop screen in her tiny apartment, feeling sick. The article painted her as an opportunist who had manipulated a grieving widower and his vulnerable daughter for financial gain. It questioned her motives, her qualifications, and most painfully, suggested that Emma was being exploited by a teacher who should have maintained professional boundaries. Her phone buzzed constantly, reporters, school administrators, even parents from her class expressing concern. The principal called an emergency meeting, her voice tight with worry about the school's reputation. "Sarah, you understand our position," Principal Morrison said, her usually warm demeanor replaced by administrative caution. "The school board is asking questions. Parents are concerned. Perhaps it would be best if you stepped back from this arrangement." But it was James's business partner, Richard Walsh, who delivered the killing blow. Sarah sat in the Chun family's living room, watching this cold-eyed man in expensive suit tear apart everything they'd built together. "James, this is a liability nightmare," Richard said, not bothering to lower his voice despite Emma playing nearby. "A schoolteacher with obvious financial problems attached to your family? The board of directors is concerned about your judgment. Your father-in-law is threatening legal action for Emma's custody if this continues." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Emma's grandfather, Lynn's father, had been watching, waiting for James to make a mistake that would give him grounds to take Emma away. "You need to end this," Richard continued. "Pay her off, send her away, and get back to focusing on what matters, the company, and securing Emma's future properly." James looked between Sarah and Emma, his face a mask of anguish. Sarah saw the exact moment he started to retreat back into the safe, distant shell he'd inhabited before. The same fear that had kept him in the limousine was pulling him away from the life they'd been building. "Maybe Richard's right," James said quietly, not meeting Sarah's eyes. "Maybe I've been selfish, putting Emma at risk for legal complications. Maybe it would be better if no." Emma's clear voice cut through the adult conversation like a blade. She stood up from her coloring book, her 8-year-old frame radiating fierce determination. "Miss Martinez isn't going anywhere." "Emma." "Sweetheart, the adults need to," Richard began. "I don't care what the adults think," Emma said, walking over to stand beside Sarah's chair. "Miss Martinez didn't want Daddy's money. She wanted to help me. She gave me her sandwich when I was hungry, and she stays late to help me with math. Because she cares, not because anyone pays her to care." Emma turned to her father, her dark eyes blazing with wisdom far beyond her years. "Daddy, you told me that Mommy said not to let work be more important than family. Miss Martinez is family. Now, if you send her away because you're scared of what people think, you're choosing work over family again." The room fell silent. Sarah watched James's face crumble as his daughter's words hit their mark. This 8-year-old had just delivered the most powerful argument of her life, and everyone in the room knew it. James stood up slowly, walked over to Richard, and said with quiet finality, "Get out of my house." "James, think about what you're—" "I said get out." James's voice carried the authority of a man who'd built an empire, but also the conviction of a father who'd finally learned what mattered. And Richard, you're fired. Consider our partnership dissolved. As Richard stormed out, James knelt down in front of Emma and Sarah, taking both their hands. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I almost made the same mistake again. I almost chose fear over family. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their new home, not the sterile mansion, but a warm, lived-in house in the suburbs with a backyard where Emma could play in windows that actually opened to let in fresh air. James had sold the Pacific Heights house, saying it held too many ghosts and not enough laughter. The custody battle with Emma's grandfather had been swift and decisive. When the judge interviewed Emma privately, the 8-year-old had explained clearly and confidently that she wanted to stay with her daddy and Miss Martinez because they were her family and they made her feel safe and loved. Sarah no longer taught at Lincoln Elementary, not because she'd been forced out, but because she'd chosen to start something new. The Chun Foundation for Educational Innovation had opened 3 learning centers in underfunded neighborhoods, with Sarah as the director of curriculum. Her programs focused on children like Emma, kids who needed more than textbooks, who needed adults who saw their potential and invested in their futures. James still ran his company, but differently now. He left the office at 5 every day. No exceptions. Board meetings were scheduled around Emma's school events. And twice a week, he volunteered at Sarah's learning centers, teaching basic computer skills to kids who reminded him of why success meant nothing without people to share. It was the evening news story that had once threatened to destroy them ended up changing everything in the most unexpected way. Local Teachers' Kindness Transforms Lives ran on the 6 o'clock news, featuring interviews with Sarah, James, and Emma about their unconventional family and their mission to help other children in need. That night, as they sat around their kitchen table, Emma working on homework while Sarah graded papers and James responded to emails about the foundation, Sarah marveled at how a single shared sandwich had led to this moment. Miss Martinez, Emma looked up from her math problems. Are you going to keep being my teacher forever? Sarah glanced at James, who was watching them both with eyes full of love and gratitude. Actually, Emma, Sarah said, reaching over to tuck a curl behind the little girl's ear, I was hoping I could just be your mom. Emma's face lit up like the sun. Really? Can we tell people I have a teacher mom? James laughed, the sound rich and warm in their cozy kitchen. We can tell them whatever makes you happy, sweetheart. Later that evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, the little girl whispered, Thank you for sharing your sandwich that day. It wasn't just food, was it? No, sweetheart, Sarah whispered back. It was love. And love always finds a way to grow. A broke teacher had shared her last meal with a hungry student, never knowing that this single act of kindness would heal a broken family and create a love story that would change hundreds of lives through the programs they would build together. Sometimes the smallest gestures really do create the biggest miracles. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.